good afternoon, and thank you for attending the Rackesblum Computer Consulting monthly webinar series. Just a heads up, this is being recorded and we will post this on our website and on our YouTube channel within about a week. My name is Kelly Bergman, and I have the pleasure of introducing you to Kelly Kaufman and Kristen Baumgartner. I'm sure neither of them needs an introduction, as most of you at one time or another have worked with them and know they are more than qualified to lead this webinar featuring year end. So I'll not waste any more time. Kelly and Kristen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so
Kelly.
much. Appreciate that introduction, Kelly. And welcome, everybody. We're going to talk about our year-end processing and how that's going to affect us for 2022 today. My name is Kristen Baumgartner. I'm going to start us off, and then we're going to transition to Kelly Kaufman. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to go over a real brief agenda here. We're going to be talking about why our year-end matters. We'll go through our order of closing and some details on that process. We're going to look at our individual Sage modules, and we're going to talk about special considerations for each of their year-end closing processes. I'm going to hand it over to Kelly at that time. We're going to go through some Sage payroll, and she's also going to be covering our W-2s, 1099 forms, ACA reporting. We're also going to have time at the end for questions and answers. So if anybody has questions as we go through our presentation, please use your Zoom controls, put that in the chat box, put that in the Q&A, whatever you have access to, and we'll make sure to get those addressed at the end of our presentation as well. So kicking us off. Number one, I do want to call out for anybody that was on our presentation for 2021 year end. I made a complete jerk out of myself. And when we asked this question for year end, what happens? I thought it was all about planning parties. I thought it was a celebration year end. That's what it strikes for me. So this year I was more responsible. I knew it wasn't about alcohol. I knew this year it was all about our New Year's resolutions. So I know that this entire presentation is going to be covering about how we want to improve in 2023, what's important to us, what are those resolutions, what are we going to do? Now, please, Kelly Kaufman, I got that right this year, right? It's not about parties, it's about resolutions.
As much as I love parties, Kristen, I still don't think you have this completely right. I think our audience is going to be a little bit more interested in what they can learn about Sage's year-end processing.
I will do my best. I will get my act together. Let me get my notes started. But Kelly, can you talk to us a little bit about what we're actually happening at year end?
Absolutely. During year-end processing, we have certain things that will be cleared. As our period to date balances, they're going to be cleared for that period, and then they're going to move to the prior year or prior period. We're going to clear our year-to-date balances that are accumulated in all of our master files, and it's going to prepare all of our master files for the new year as well. We're going to execute our history retention based on our setup options. That means based on our setup options, there's going to be information that is actually going to purge and be deleted out of our software. And we're also going to prevent posting to that closed period or that closed year. This is a great time for us to take a look at several items that really are important to our business. What about our disaster recovery plan? What about the space on our server? Or how about the operating system on our server? Are we still in compatibility? Are we compliant with 1099s, W-2s, things like that? How about if we review our users and our roles? Nowadays, with everybody so hard up for employees, we have to actually substitute certain employees to do certain roles that they never had to do before. We can review our history retention. Maybe we purged some information last year that we still wanted to keep. So if we review that history retention and boost it up a little bit, we won't actually complete the same thing we did last year. We want to communicate with our target employees. We want to prepare for that year end, and we want to look at next year's considerations for our business. And how can we help improve our ERP processes for the next year? Maybe it's time to look at integration, some other pieces that we want to actually implement that go together with our Sage software.
That's great advice, Kelly. And yes, that time at the end of the year, let's look at our processes. Let's dig into what we can do, what we can change. And we're going to kind of take you through some options here. Again, these are suggestions. These are great kind of best business practices as to how you keep that clean space. First and foremost, one of the most important things to review is your module options. Normally in your modules, you're going to have a date or a data history retention process. Now, in the example I'm showing you here, we're looking at accounts receivable, and I'm specifically on the history tab in our module option setups. In AR specifically, we actually can see two areas where we can kind of choose how much history we're retaining. Every module should have some type of history retention. You want to go through and really double check that. Make sure you're retaining as much history as is important to your business. Now, one thing we do want to point out here, if you do have these set up to be for only 2 years, my example is showing 7 years, the system is only going to retain your current active year along with your prior year. So that's not 2 years history and current, that is current year and 1 year prior. Most customers we work with, we're going to see at least going into 3, if not more years, just so you have that 2-year history retention. Now, specifically when we get into the upper versions of Sage, and I know we're in Sage released version 2022 right now, but in version 2020 and up, you will see there might be additional places that will have date retention. Again, using that AR module, in the additional tab, we can see periods to retain when it comes to how long we're keeping our paid invoices as an example. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that this has changed in version 2020 and up to say months to retain our paid invoices. Previous versions, 2019 and below, if you're still on a legacy version, you're going to see days to retain. So make sure you're really reading your module options so you're setting your correct time frames. Another time, like Kelly was mentioning, things that we can do, we want to focus on looking at best business practices to clean up your data. First, we're going to target talking about our old purchase orders and sales orders. Now, one of the things it can be important to retain this history within your system, but when you get egregiously back on your old POs and sales orders, we do want to point out that this can actually slow down your data processing to retain all these records. So when you look up your data with that magnifying glass, you can see how many records you have on most of your lookups. So in this example, you're seeing almost 17,000 records. That is it can slow your system down. For this example, it certainly was slowing this system down. And you can purge those old sales orders and purchase orders if they're not viable, if they're not information that you need to retain. Another place that we're going to see a good way to clean up data is empty batches. Now, we might have all seen this at one point in time. If you have activated batches for any of your modules, you might see that your entries are showing as a 0 and that your date creation might be really far in the past. These are times when you can either go in and select that batch and delete it. If you do have your options set to retain your deleted batches, you would select that batch and update it, but that doesn't affect your general ledger. It's just how you would clear out that information. Now, when it comes to other pieces, reports, right, especially those audit reports for customers, vendors, or inventory, if you've enabled that audit tracking, those reports can get very large. Now, Kelly and I want to be very clear that we want to make sure that anything we can easily duplicate in history, we don't necessarily need to archive. But if it's something that is really going to purge out of your system, you do want to archive that information before you run through a purge. So in this example, this is a purge of your audit file. You might want to save that report. You might want to print it out, archive it as a PDF, send it to Paperless Office, however you're currently set up. You might want to archive it so you have it, but again, you don't necessarily want the data being kept in your Sage 100 system. Speaking of Paperless Office, that's another great time to kind of archive and purge those journals, registers, and the period end docs that we might be retaining if you are using Paperless Office. Now, when it comes to these records, sometimes there's so many the documents all won't load. You need to actually allow special permissions to say, yes, bring in all of my records. If you are using your paperless office, you can go into your viewer, you can use the delete section for that particular report, and you can pull it out. And again, you can always reprint it from your history if needed from that paperless office record. Now, order of closing, we do want to touch on because you need a plan, okay? We can't just willy-nilly go into our year-end closing. We need to kind of do this systematically. And you're going to hear me say this several times in our presentation today. Back up your data. This is so important, guys. This is so critical. For any changes in your system, no one wants to think the worst is going to happen. But if you do have something that goes awry, if the process gets interrupted, if you found that there really was a bunch of information that you missed that's closing or should not be closed, this is the only way that we can back up a system. You can only do this and reverse a year-end closing by restoring from that backup. So very critical, guys, make sure that you're backing up your data before you go into these processes. Like most period end closing, all users should be out of Sage before performing this period or year end processing. Again, best business practice just makes sense. It makes your system run more efficiently. You also don't want a chance having somebody entering transactions randomly that you are not recording and are not posted correctly. Now, I do have a system module list on the side, and this order of closing is important. If you have a module that is not listed on here, or I should say, there's a module that you don't use that is listed, you can feel free to skip and go to the next one in the order. This logic is actually is dictated by Sage, and basically it's making sure that the application or subsidiary module that writes up to our next module is processed first. So we have all information recorded, processed, posted. It's all set to go for the next module roll up. So for an example, you would really want to make sure that you have everything closed out in your PO module before you go into your AP module for closing. That's really why this list is structured the way it is. I'm going to point out that certain modules don't actually have a Sage 100 period end function or year end function, but we do recommend going in and reviewing them. So for example, the first one on our list for bill of materials, make sure that you don't have production entries, empty batches hanging out there. You want to review it, make sure that you really do have information as up to date as possible, even though that module does not have a true period end process. Now, in our second tab, you're going to notice there's a couple different call outs for our data table names. One thing I just want to point out, depending on if you're using any of these manufacturing modules, work order, production management, or operations management, in production management, you might see they're either referred to as JT tables or PM tables, but it really depends on the version of production management you have. So I just didn't want anybody to be confused with that information. On our number 6 tab for our material requirements planning, anybody that's using MRP, there really isn't a period end close, but there is a year end close process there. Any of our customers that are using the new IRP, which is activated when you're using a production management based environment or just activating IRP, that module does not have its own year end close. It would be having a orange X, just like the rest of them. It doesn't actually have a period end, but again, reviewing all of our information before closing is recommended. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about our closing checklist. Now, we've talked about the order, and I'm hoping that makes sense to everybody. There's an order of operations that we kind of do things, but what does it actually look like? What do I actually do to close these year end? One thing we're going to talk about before we get into the specific modules is, please understand you've got resources. Each Sage module does have a closing checklist. This is in the Sage help files. We're going to talk in just a minute about how you can access that. But there is a common thread between closing of any module that you're working on. You want to make sure, number one, all of your transactions are entered and updated. You're going to make sure that your general ledger, your daily transaction registers, those are all updated. You want to make sure to print and save any reports that you need before that year-end close. You want to, this is talking to that order of operations, reconcile to the general ledger with all your subsidiary modules. So make sure everything that needs to be closed before the module you're working on is done. And then you actually go through your period end processing. Again, reinforcing it, throwing it out there, guys. Please, if you take nothing else away, back up your data. Before we go into a close, we want to make sure that we have that data backup. It really is a great safety net. It is just in case, but unfortunately, sometimes we need to use that just in case scenario. So these closing checklists that I mentioned, they can be found directly in your Sage environment. On your Sage top ribbon, if you go into your Help tab, there's going to be a bubble there that's called Help Topics. When you click on that, that actually launches a web browser. And in this web browser based, from Sage, you simply type in period end checklist. And you can see I've entered that into my search bubble. It will present a list to you. You can see I've pulled up 32 different lists and different tips and tricks on that period end and year end closing. You're just going to go through that list, and for the module you're specifically looking to close, you can see the examples that are showing here are GL and AP. You would click on that hyperlink, it'll take you to an article along with that closing checklist and take you for the individual steps by each module. And again, you can access this right from your Sage environment. So we've kind of given a general overview. Now let's get into some specifics. Each module can be and behave a little bit differently. There are certain things for each one that we need to pay special consideration to. So we're going to start out with accounts receivable. Specifically in AR, when you're going through a period end, a year end close, you want to make sure that you're reviewing any repetitive invoice ending dates. You want to make sure that those are still accurate, that they're falling in their correct periods. You're going to print your sales and tax report as you need by your jurisdiction. Make sure that you've received a copy of that and you've got a copy out of your system. You're also going to review finance charges, statements, and commissions. Now, those are things that are specific to AR, and that's the things that you want to kind of go through as a special consideration for that module. On the AP side, again, same flavor. You're reviewing those repetitive invoice ending dates, making sure that all of those are still accurate. You're going to run your AP to AR clearing. And before you actually do your year end processing for accounts payable, you're going to make sure that all of your 1099s are printed and processed through the system. Again, Kelly's going to touch a little bit more on the 1099s as we go through our presentation. On our purchase order side, this is a biggie, guys. Reconcile your purchase clearing report. Now, I'm going to make a special note out here. The purchase clearing report is your quantity ordered, your quantity received against your quantity invoice. Now, this is very important for our year-end processing, but we really recommend you actually do this on a monthly basis. So it's a lot easier to correct if you're missing information. If you realize you missed that invoice from that vendor, if you realize that you didn't receive all your product, that's a lot easier to capture in like a 30-day turn than trying to do it in a 365 turn. So really, this is an important one in purchase order. You want to do this on a monthly basis, but it is very important for your year-end processing as well. On your sales order module, you're going to review your tax rates. If you're using Sage for your tax schedules, you do need to update those manually for a year end and a changeover. If you're using something like a tax integrated software like Avalara, those again are automatic for you. You also in sales order want to make sure you want to reconcile all your customer deposits. So make sure that all of that is cleared out. We're good to go in sales order before you actually complete that year-end processing. Now, inventory, near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk a lot about inventory here, guys, so hold on to your seats. First and foremost, specifically for the year-end processing, you want to make sure that you've resolved your negative tier items. This negative tier can be generated a few different ways. We're going to talk about that in a second, but we do want to point out that when you're using the negative tier, you're going to choose either your valuation report or valuation report by period. Now, one of the great examples of when you choose one or the other is, let's say, for instance, you were doing a physical count and your actual physical count is happening around that month on time, and you put the freeze in for your end of month. So again, example, we're doing a freeze for 12/31. Your valuation report, if you run it as of today, so let's say, again, better example, we're doing a physical count freeze for October 31st, but we're running our valuation for today on November 16th. The way that you run this is going to be your valuation by period, as opposed to just your standard valuation report, because you're going to be focused on when that freeze closes or when that end of month closes. So again, using and resolving those negative tiers, we kind of choose either that valuation or valuation report by period. I do want to point out your physical count process is a separate process before you really go through the year-end close. I hate saying the words physical count. It usually gives everybody a lot of anxiety and everybody starts to get knots in their stomach. But if you do that physical count either at year end or cycle counts, this is before you do the year end, and it's not rolled into that year end or period end processing. Physical count is a separate process in Sage 100. Talking specifically about inventory, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. If you are using LIFO, FIFO, or lot serial valuation, we do want to talk about our costing tiers. Now, your tiers should be part of the physical inventory and the physical count process, okay? One thing that's important to point out is that when you're trying to resolve your costing tiers, you do want your quantity and your cost to be listed as 0, or you really don't remove that tier. So if you've got a 0 quantity, but that cost is still remaining, your utilities are not going to purge that out of your system. So when you're reviewing your costing tiers, you really want to make sure that both the quantity and the cost are both equaling out to 0. This utility, it only removes the tier. It's not going to remove the record from your cost table. It's not going to pull it, or excuse me, it's going to remove the record from your cost table, but it's not going to pull it out of your history. So you don't necessarily lose data, but it is going to be retained in history, but you want to clear it out because, as I mentioned, this is one of those important pieces if you are doing that physical count, but also extremely important for our year-end close. In physical count, it does help you. It makes your count sheet shorter. It makes them more accurate. And again, this utility of removing that 0 quantity costing tiers just makes sure that quantity and cost are both equaling out to 0. Now, when we have negative tiers, again, this usually is going to mean that something was over distributed in one of your transactions. The first way that we address this is we run that negative tier report, and that is located under our period end processing and inventory. We review, again, those valuation methods that I spoke about, and you're going to determine if you actually have anything that's showing as a negative costing tier. When you run the negative tier adjustment, this is one way to correct it. And this, again, this negative tier adjustment report is under your year-end processing and inventory management, and it will automatically adjust those negative items. Now, some people are not comfortable with that. Some people want more control. You can make these changes manually using transaction entry and inventory. So again, there's 2 ways to address it, but we do want to make sure that those tiers, those negative tiers, are cleared out correctly before we go into year-end processing, and especially if we're going to go into physical counts. For those of you doing a year-end physical count, first of all, my heart goes out to you. It is a stressful time, and we wish you speed and accuracy in all things. One count and done, right? But a couple tips and tricks we did want to give you on our physical count. Typically, we're going to see companies are going to freeze and print their worksheets. Freezing your items takes a snapshot of your quantities at the time of the freeze. Now, normal sales processes, purchasing processes, they can still continue if you're doing that physical count freeze. And that freeze is really changed or released when your worksheet in this physical count worksheet is either set to clear your frozen items, or you've actually processed your physical counts variance register up all the way through, posted, reviewed, and updated it to your GL. Specifically on physical count, and this is me, but I like to give this piece of advice, we recommend not checking the print quantity on hand. What this will do is on your physical count worksheets, it actually shows you what your Sage quantity on hand is. Now, that can be super helpful when you're, as the administrator, looking to balance what your physical count entries are. However, just a word of caution, sometimes if we put, hey, there's 500 of this particular item and we list it on the sheet, we can get ourselves into a situation where someone might just eyeball when they're actually counting and say, yeah, that looks about 500. And that's what they enter on their sheet. Removing this print quantity on hand really gives you a lot more accurate of a physical count. It also allows you to kind of look at your zero quantity on hand as well to review that. That's also why we recommend not checking your default quantity counted to your quantity on hand. Being able to see on your reports what is listed as a zero item is really just as important, because if we don't flag it out to be counted or to look for it, it is something where you could still have quantity on hand. You might have stock levels, you might have something sitting on the shelf that's taking up valuable real estate, but we don't know to count it because we think that there's a zero quantity on hand. Basically, one thing, when you process your physical counts variance register, that will roll all the way up to your GL. So again, if you are doing that year end, you want to make sure that that's completed before you go into year end processing. And in version 2020 of Sage and up, you're also going to see you do have a new option on your report, which is to include all your lot and serial tiers. So again, for those of you in the upper versions, 2020, 2021, 2022, this is an option you can also include in your report. Freezing your items can also be systematic wide. A year-end count is usually all items, but please know that in your selections grid in that lower grid, you can also tailor to what you want to count if you want to try and take it in smaller digestible pieces. I'm going to talk really quickly on fixed assets. With fixed assets, if you're currently using them, your posting book checkboxes have been replaced by this grid with a book name and a closed book column. Now, this column, you can basically use those checkboxes to select the books that you want to process for your period end. So this does give you control over what you're bringing in, what you want to be processing. This change was made in Sage Fixed Assets in version 2021. So if you're on an older version, you might still see that old grid. But again, this is one of those special considerations. If you are using your fixed assets, this is a way that you can go through your fixed assets period end processing as well. All right, last one, our big dog, special considerations for general ledger. So this is your coup de grace. This is the end of all of your year-end processing. It's all going to come down into your general ledger. So making sure all those subsidiary modules are posted before you get to here is really important. In GL specifically, you are going to make sure that you've processed all your year-end allocations before closing. Sometimes that's a step that can get skipped. So we always like to call that out. You also would want to review your ending recurring journal entries. Again, making sure that all of your dates, everything looks good. You don't have something that's going to need to run over to that next year. One thing, and this is a piece of advice, is that if you do have an outside auditor or even an in-house one, you might want to consider keeping your GL open and not completing your year-end processing until they have reviewed and been able to enter any additional entries. So this can give you anxiety. Nobody's like, hey, we're done. We want to get everything closed. This actually helps your auditor. But keeping it open can be a little scary. So we're going to talk for just a second about you reviewing those date settings for your company code specifically. Now here in your company maintenance for each of your Sage company codes, you do have the ability to control your document dates. So you can allow for the periods outside of your current processing, both forward and back, prior years and future, and prior periods and future periods. It's really important that if you do want to keep the GL open, that you kind of review these settings. Basically what this does is if someone tries to go rogue and enter a transaction in a period that's not acceptable, not what you want to be doing with your year-end closing, this gives them a message and stops them from doing it. One thing I do want to point out is the screen version I'm showing you is what it looks like in Sage 2022. So anybody that hasn't already upgraded to the 22 version, any version lower, this information, I have my own dates tab in 2022. This information and where you would record these period processing dates is going to be on your preferences tab in the lower versions. And this option became available in 2019. So again, anybody that's on before 2019, you might not have this option, but as soon as we get into the supported options, you will have the ability to control this period. All right, I'm going to stop yapping for a second, and we're going to give it over to Kelly Kaufman. She's going to talk to us a little bit about our Sage 100 payroll processes, our 1099s and our W-2s. Kelly, I'm giving the floor to you, my dear.
Well, thank you. And here you thought all you knew was New Year's resolutions.
I admit I prepped a little bit on the back end, but again, I still like my resolutions. So got to keep those in place.
Perfect. We all need New Year's resolutions, but we'll kick it off with payroll here. I'm going to let you know we have a couple different payroll supported versions right now. And I want to explain to you why it's important for you to stay current on your maintenance. This is going to include any product updates to payroll, any hot fixes that might be available in payroll, and also be able to provide you with the tax table downloads that are maintained in Sage Tax Cloud at this time. You can find your current Sage 100 and Sage 100 payroll versions in the About Sage 100 screen. We're back at that help screen that Kristen showed you earlier, and then we just go to the About Cloud selection, and then it'll actually just tell you exactly what you have installed in your system. The payroll tax release that we are current with right now is 2.22.3. That was released in September of this year. There are two other releases underneath it. One actually does have a hot fix for the 941 form. We would really suggest you to go up to 2.22.3, especially since it's so easy now to do a payroll only upgrade. You don't have to upgrade the version of software you're on as long as you're on 2019 or above. Payroll can be upgraded alone as a standalone upgrade. Payroll tax tables are pushed down to you. They are not downloaded and installed by your reseller anymore. If you are not current on your tax table update, as soon as you go to enter in a payroll, the system will tell you you have an available tax table to download and actually run with. Accounts payable 1099s. I got some bad news for you people that are still on version 2019. As of the release of 2022, that made Sage retire 2019 for support purposes. 2019 may be eligible to get those e-filing 1099 updates for the forms. They may not be. I can't guarantee you that for the end of the year. So what happens if I'm not on a supported payroll version? Well, you could definitely try and file your e-filings and make sure that your downloads are updating the actual updated forms that you need to use to file the different forms, whether those be your 941s, your 945s, your W-2s, your 1095s, or your 1099s. But it does say that only users on a supported version can use Aeatrix for processing. Like I said on the previous screen, 2019 may be able to get those updates at the end of the year. We just can't guarantee that at this point. Options. We always have options. If you're not on a supported Sage payroll version, first of all, reach out to your reseller, get that upgrade done. Again, a payroll only upgrade is so much easier than a full version Sage upgrade. It doesn't take a lot of time. It goes over top and you get your new features that are available to you as well. You could process those forms outside of Sage through a third party or manually by yourself by purchasing the forms and just printing them or typing them. I'm not really quite sure anybody still has a typewriter nowadays, so it might be
That's
a
not
little bit
true.
more difficult to do that. But
I've heard of people with typewriters, Kelly. They're still around.
I can't believe that. You know, I really would have thought that those would have gone away with the VHS machines. Definitely reach out to Veracus. We're going to definitely give you some other options. And the biggest one we're going to suggest is to get that payroll or that Sage version upgraded so that you're compatible with e-filing. We have some 1099 special considerations for 2022. If you're required to furnish a Form 1099, this has to be filed to the IRS by January 1st of 2023. That's a typo for us. And if you are required to furnish your Form 1099 miscellaneous, those must be to the payee and filed with the IRS in different dates. The payee must have theirs by January 31st. The IRS, if you're filing paper, must be filed by March 1st. If you're filing electronically, they're going to give you an extra 30 days for that. What's all required in our 1099s? We have to have Ahtrex or e-filing installed on our user's workstation. That is a workstation installation. It is not a server install. You can have Ahtrex e-filing installed on 2 workstations. You need to be current on your software maintenance plan with Sage and have an active internet connection. If you're not current on your software maintenance, when you enter into e-filing, it's going to tell you you're in demo mode. And then if you try to print any forms out, it's going to print the big demo word across all of it. They won't be able to be filed that way. And then we're going to want you to, of course, install any necessary updates from Ahtrex to be compatible with any of the forms. The automatic update is the easiest one to run. And I apologize, the system doesn't know exactly which state you're in. So you're going to get all updates, every single state update. How do we turn on 1099s in our system? Through our accounts payable module in vendor maintenance, underneath the additional tab, we have a whole selection just dedicated for our 1099 information, where we can set our vendor types, our default forms, all of the vendor information as far as their social security, their doing business as name, their address. This is the address that is going to be used and printed on your 1099s. It is not the remit to address in vendor maintenance, nor is it the vendor maintenance address. We can also see our 1099 history from there as well. We can.
Sorry, Kelly.
That's all right. That's all I really wanted to say about that, Kristen. So you could have gone anyway. Our AP invoice data entry, we can actually enter in 1099 information by specific invoices. It doesn't have to be any invoice that we enter into AP invoice data entry that is going to go towards our 1099 totals. Right within AP invoice data entry, we can actually drop down our 1099 form information and our box by that specific invoice. Sage 100 1099 fax. The amount is based on our check date. It's not the invoice date that you enter it into accounts payable. It is the payment date. Our 1099 year is underneath our options, underneath the main tab of accounts payable. And like I said earlier, the 1099 address does not use the vendor remit to address. There are a couple different reports within Sage that you could run to verify the amounts to your 1099 vendors. That would be your vendor listing with balances or your payment history report. We print our 1099s through our report menu underneath accounts payable. It's simply called 1099 tax reporting. You can run this multiple times, and you can also complete the e-filing once if that's how you would like to proceed. You are still required for a 1099 and 1096 when filing by paper to have them in red on that very first form. We have some 1099 e-filing and reporting options here. Like we previously talked, you could print them on your own. It's kind of free. I know Kristen likes the word free. She forgot the R in the other two, but she really likes free. When you printed them on your own, it's not completely free. You still have to purchase those perforated forms. So there is a little bit of a cost there. And of course, the time to actually complete those on that typewriter with the VHS machine in the background. E-filing, if you are required, if you have more than 250 1099s, you are required to e-file. You cannot file by paper anymore. The other option is you can completely ask somebody else, a third party, or outsource this process or task. You would need to check with that third party for their specifics and maybe whatever charges they would cost. So here we have a picture of the wizard. You can follow the wizard through 1099 e-filing for each form type, and then you can, the e-filing will tell you if you have passed all of your errors. I don't know if you can see, like kind of in the middle at the top, there's that little next button up there. You just keep pushing that next button. It tells you what you're going to be reviewing, and then it's going to tell you if you have any errors in the sections that it just verified for accuracy. Again, that 1099 copy A, 1096 forms, all must be printed on pre-printed forms with red ink. Payroll year end. Just like Kristen said, make sure you have a backup. Backups are so important. They're telling you here that we should have you updated to the latest and greatest version of payroll, which, as I previously stated, is 2.22.3. The payroll 2X version tax is maintained in CLAD, which would be the cloud, and the system table changes will be pushed down via the payroll tax update within the software. Again, if you're out of a date with that tax table, it will tell you as soon as you enter into a payroll data entry that there is a tax table available for you to download and install. Make sure you update this whenever you're prompted to. That's going to keep you up to date on all of your tax rates for withholdings in all the different states. You want to check your unemployment tax rate at year end and update this information when you receive the notice from the government. You don't have to wait until 1/1 of the next year anymore. In the newer versions, in company tax group setup, we can actually enter in an effective date with a different tax rate. That does two things for us. First of all, we have a history record of our tax rates for previous years. Second of all, I don't have to wait to enter that because my effective date isn't until next year. Now I won't forget to actually enter that information in the system. Payroll end resets. This is always fun. Resets will do exactly how you have it set up to do. That is another reason why we take a backup, so that we can see exactly what we had reset between our backup and our actual current quarter that we're in. What happens? The current quarter is going to be set to the next quarter. If it's year end, it's going to be set to the first quarter of the next year. Your time off accrual values are updated based on your settings in payroll. If this is a year-end close, your employee year-to-date direct deposits are cleared. Your employees that were marked terminated are removed if they have no history. Pension plan deductions are reset at year-end if that is checked as an option. If an employee has no history for a deduction code, that is also removed from the employee's record. The calendar year is reset. And I'm sorry, if the calendar year is select in the reset time off based on our payroll options, then our unused employee time is carried over to the next year or up to the carryover limit that is set within employee maintenance. Our history records are purged if they are older than the number of years that we're set to retain them. Again, that is in payroll options under the history tab. And the current processing year is set in payroll options is advanced to the next year. We also have a checklist for payroll period end. We want to set the payroll module date to the year ending date. Then we want to go into our report selection, and there's some certain reports that we're going to want to print. Our quarterly tax report, our check history report, quarterly pay recap, and our deduction reports. Now you can print any other report. These are just the ones that we would suggest to be minimal of report printing at year end for payroll. Then we're going to go to period end and we're going to print the other following reports that we would suggest. Our quarterly unemployment report, our federal e-filing and reporting. We want to select our 941 form and any applicable sales, payroll forms or reports. W-2s within our federal e-filing and reporting, along with our 1095s, 1096s, any 941s, 945s, anything like that. We want to reconcile our 941 forms to our W-3 form. We want to do that before we complete our e-filing or actual paper filings. We don't want to be issuing a bunch of corrections at a later time. We want to do that reconciliation before we even provide anybody with those forms. Again, back up our company data, back up. And then we're going to just simply complete our period end processing. After the reports are printed and verified, it's going to ask us if we want to complete our period end. And as long as we've completed our entire checklist, all of our forms, all of our filings, we're going to say yes to that. Aetrix and e-filing. We have to make sure it's installed. If it's not installed, give us a call or give your reseller a call. We're definitely going to be able to help you get that on that workstation. We're going to choose our forms from federal and state tax reporting. Then the Aetrix box is going to populate in front of us. And then we're going to automatically update our forms to the latest and greatest forms that are available out there. That's going to give us our 2022 forms this year. This is an example of our W-2 setup wizard. You can make any changes in the grid. Just like the 1099s, it's got that next button. You're going to be able to select that. It's going to check things. The first things it's going to check is to make sure that you don't have anything complete with the names, then the social security number, and it's just going to completely go through all of the wages and all of the other information that a W-2 would require. Our filing options. We have a couple different filing options here as well. If we decide to complete our W-2 e-filing through our e-filing center, again, there are going to be costs to that, and it is going to list it right out in your W-2 printing and filing options. What the e-filing center will do is actually print and mail all of your employee copies. If the employee is set up for an W-2 form, which means they will electronically receive that through email. We do have that available as well. They're going to file your federal W-2s and your W-3 to the Social Security office. They're also going to file your state W-2s and reconciliation forms with the state. And then there's those three options. If you do decide to e-file through the e-filing center, file your federal, your state, and your e-filing to all, or e-W-2s available for all employees. Those are free and included with the package. There are other options though. You can print your employee W-2s on those perforated forms and hand them out or mail them out yourself. That's no cost except for the forms and the paper. And then at that point, you could also select to print your federal W-2s and W-3s along with your state W-2s and reconciliation forms. And these would be official copies that you could actually paper file. Now we'll go into what forms are actually needed. Employee W-2s, copy B, C, and 2 copies of 2s. These must be printed on blank 4-part perforated paper with the employee notice on the back of it. You could probably get away with printing the employee notice on a separate piece of paper. It is suggested to have it printed on the back of the actual W-2. Federal W-2 copy A, print that to plain paper. Our W-3 is printed to plain paper. Our state copy is printed to the 4 blank part perforated forms. Our copy D, which is our employer W-2 copy, prints 4 per sheet. You can print that to plain or blank 4-part perforated paper. This is your copies, so it doesn't really matter. Forms also can be ordered through Sage Checks and Forms or purchased at most local office supply stores. If you've got an easy button, it might even be delivered to you. Follow the prompts and read what Atrix is telling you. It's going to be easier that way. Again, using that next button, it's going to tell you what it's verifying. It's going to tell you the next step that you have to go to. So now, how do we email our W-2s or those EW-2s? We have to actually get approval from the employee first. So then what we can do is there is a section in the newer versions of payroll that we can have them select to have the W-2 consent and the 1095 consent. Both of those are capable of being emailed to them. As long as we have this checkboxed when processing our W-2s and federal e-filing and reporting, then that opens up that EW-2 option within the e-filing options. Moving along over to our ACA reporting requirements. For tax year 2022, the laws are still pretty much the same. The 1095-C has to go to applicable employees by March 2nd of 2023. Filing paper forms 1094-C, 1095-C with the IRS is February 28th. And if you're electronically filing, they're going to give you an extra 31 days. So you won't have to have that due until March 31st. It's also worth noting that our employees that are submitting more than 250, again, more than 250 is required to submit through e-filing or electronically. Resources. We have a ton of resources. We've got several places that you can go to get additional information or actually information that we've reviewed over today. You can go to the Sage Year-End Center out on Sage City, the Affordable Care Act Center, which is also on Sage City, or we could go specifically to Sage City. We've got some forums from Sage City. Sage University also has information, but we could also live chat and have a question and answer session with Sage if we used the last link.
All right, and I think that that's going to bring us to questions. Kelly, thank you so much for going through all of that information. Kelly Bergman, I'm hoping that you were monitoring our question and answer in our chat boxes. Do we have any questions come up for our session?
Yeah, so the first one is, first of all, we will be sending the slides out to everybody afterwards. We did get a couple questions about that. And then if you e-file with Atrix, do you need any of the pre-printed 1099 forms?
Absolutely not.
Oh, that's a great answer. Do you have a recommendation on how far back you remove zero quantity tiers in inventory and in IM? For example, if we do our physical count 12/31/22, should we remove zero tiers prior to 1/1/22, or can we remove these prior to 12/1/22? And I think one of those should be 23.
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, we're seeing if we do have that zero quantity tiers, how far back should we remove them? Kelly Kaufman, I'm going to leverage your expertise here as well, but I believe, first off, this is indicating to me that we didn't actually do, if we're going a year back, we didn't actually do period end processing the year before. For those zero quantity tiers, should we remove them prior to January 2022? If they're representing in your report, you do need to address them. That's kind of how I've always handled it. Kelly, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, if you're seeing zero quantity costing tiers in your reports, the reports are only going out 2 digits. You possibly have 4-digit costing, and what's happening is that costing tier isn't really zero. It's probably got like 0.0032 cents on it or something like that. You really need to dig into those and actually kind of correct those transactions. And then at that point, they would be able to be purged off.
Okay.
All right, next question. Can I reprint W-2s if an employee loses theirs?
Absolutely. You just have to go back and access e-filing again. And if you've already filed them or completed the printing process, you would access your historical forms and then you would be able to select them and reprint them individually or all of them at one time.
All right, one more question. What if I don't want to freeze inventory for my physical count? Do I have to?
That is a great question. And it's one that I've had from customers many times over the years. There are a lot of benefits to freezing your inventory, but it is not required. The biggest consideration is that if you don't want to freeze your inventory, it usually indicates that you are doing a full shutdown for your facility. If that's the case, it's usually a tighter coordination. And just keep in mind, if you're not freezing, you are manually entering every line into your physical count entry. Freezing does, like I said, have a lot more benefits, but it's kind of on a situational basis. It's not absolutely required. And that's something that if you wanted help or talk through the process, it's something that, again, reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk through that. All right. Is that all the questions that we had, Kelly?
Yeah, unless anybody has any more. I don't see any raised hands, nothing in the chat. All right, and it's never too late to ask questions after. You know Kelly, you know Kristen, so go ahead and shoot an email to any of the consultants you'd like, and we can always help you out with this if you need anything further. Lastly, I'd like to quickly thank Kelly and Kristen for taking a lot of time out of their day to put this webinar together for you. And of course, our attendees, we know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending some of it with us today. If you would like to learn more, contact us. If you need CPE credit, there will be a survey right after this. We're gonna shut her down in a couple minutes here. Fill that out. We love the feedback. And I think that's it. So no webinar in December. We're giving everybody some holiday time, and we'll see you in January. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time this afternoon.
Take care. Have a great day.